Hey there, everyone. I'd like to talk to you guys today about podcasts. Now, what is a podcast? This is a fairly big question. A podcast can be a lot of different things. It can be an interview style where, think of it more like a long format interview, whereas most interviews might be, 5 to 10 minutes long, have a set of questions. A number of podcast interviews are longer form, half an hour to an hour, some cases longer, and it's more like a conversation. It's a get to know you sort of thing. Some podcasts are not an interview style, but they are more a group of people talking about a specific subject or a specific set of subjects. Sometimes these are something along the lines of a news show. Sometimes they have one specific topic that they want to talk about. And honestly, it's very similar to, different YouTube shows. The Wide World of Geek originally started out as a news show about things such as comic books, video games, movies. Uncanny is more talking about a couple specific topics, not necessarily brand new or newsy, but there you go. I did an interview with Jim Zub earlier. Well, I guess it was last year now, and that was definitely not podcasty, but I had questions that I wanted to ask him, and we talked and we videotaped it, and it was cool. A podcast originally started off as an audio-only format that was, I don't know if it was necessarily exclusive, but it was definitely an iTunes sort of thing. You download it to iTunes, you listen to it on your iPod, and then later iPhones, etc. But it's not something that is completely exclusive to that. It's not even exclusively audio anymore. There are plenty of video podcasts out there. A lot of these are maybe just watched on a computer screen or on a phone, on an iPad, or anything like that. You can also get most of these podcasts on non-iTunes sources. I personally don't use iTunes anymore. I never had an iPhone. I'm not an iPhone advocate at all. I'm an Android person. I'm not a Mac person. I'm a PC person. And I had an iPod that was one of the the iPod Classics. And it basically just completely crapped out on me one day, and I was sick of having to dealing with the fact that it didn't keep its charge. The buttons didn't really work anymore on it. So I did some investigating, and I found that I could get all of my favorite podcasts onto my Android phone. Now, I'll let you guys know this. I don't listen to music that much. There are a few bands that I will go and I'll listen to, or if I'll hear something about them, I'll go check them out. But for the most part, what I listen to are either podcasts or audiobooks. So for me, podcasts are a very important part of my daily life. So what I want to do for you today is count down my top 5 podcasts. Now this is going to be different than a normal of Baka's top 5s because it's not going to feature the video and photos that I would with a comic book one, because the podcasts I go with are basically audio podcasts. Even the ones that are video, I listen to the audio versions. So at number 5 is a podcast called The Dork Forest. Now this is an interview style podcast that is, I guess you could say, produced by Jackie Cajun, who is a comedian, originally from Minnesota, I think the Minneapolis area, who now does all her stuff out in LA. And she will have on different people, comedians, celebrities, actors, things of that ilk. And they will talk about something that they dork out about, or as I would say, geek out about. Um, and it's funny because a lot of these podcasts lead me to other podcasts. The interview style that Jackie does is pretty relaxed. She does seem to have a few questions, but it always goes off on rabbit trails, which is really great. You truly get people who care about specific subjects really getting deep into those subjects. Now, the Dork Forest leads me to my number 4 pick, which is actually the newest podcast that I've been listening to, and that is called The Tolkien Professor. Now, I happened to hear a Dork Forest podcast where the Tolkien Professor was the guest, and he was talking a lot about The Hobbit, Desolation of Smaug, and it's a very intellectual version of a podcast. So what the Tolkien Professor is he's an actual professor of medieval literature, fantasy literature, things along those lines, and he specializes in Tolkien. Now, he's got a couple podcasts. He's got one that's called Riddles in the Dark, which they've been doing during the time that the Hobbit movies have been out. And he'll also throw in some other things. He's one of the founders of the Mythgard Institute, which is an online, you could almost call it an online college. They're working on accreditation so that people who take classes through them can actually get college credits that are transferable. But it's a hardcore literature sort of thing. And a lot of the classes are in Tolkien and in Chaucer, in Arthurian legend, and things like that. Now, the Tolkien Professor podcast system, I guess you could say, it's not an interview style. It's a conversation. It's an educational discussion. The ones that, and like I said, I'm new to this podcast. I've listened to, I think, four or five of the podcasts so far, and it's already in my top 5. But I'm a huge Tolkien fan. It's one of the things that I geek out about, and it has been since middle school. So, a lot of the stuff recently has been on the Desolation of Smaug, which I hadn't seen until today. And as I'm watching this, I'm thinking about all the things that have been said in this podcast, and I'm noticing some of these things, and I'm going, okay, yeah, I could see how they're doing that. I could see how this actor was doing that, and it makes me want to go back and see it again. Now, sadly, I think this is going to be the last day that The Hobbit, Desolation of Smaug is going to be in theaters, so I'll have to wait for DVDs, and I've actually been holding off buying any of the Hobbit DVDs because I want to get this one huge chunk, all the extended editions. But that's number 4. Now, number 3, I was going to put this up at number 2, but I think I'm going to drop it down to number 3. Number 3 is the Alton Brown cast. Now, for those of you who don't know who Alton Brown is, he is a TV personality. He's a writer, a director, a producer. He's on the Food Network. He had a long-running show called Good Eats. He is the host of Iron Chef America and many, many other projects like that. Now, the Alton Brown cast is something that he does through the Nerdist Industries, I guess you could call it the Nerdist family of podcasts. And it's an interview style podcast for the most part. He'll also do a lot of question and answer stuff before and after the interview. He'll talk about food. He'll talk about food recipes. And the people that he has on his podcast as guests, they're not necessarily chefs. They're not necessarily food personalities. He's had fashion people on there. He's had people who make bourbon and other things like along those lines. He's talked about his bow tie line, and he's had the owners of the company that he's working with make his bow ties, and they talk about socks, and he's had his fashion guy on there, his tailor, and they're very interesting interviews. there may be a little upper crust for a lot of people, but Alton Brown is an extremely interesting person. I had the opportunity to see him in November, his Alton Brown Live show in Louisville, and it was one of the best nights of my year. So, if you're a foodie, if you're interested in kind of this lifestyle that you see people like Alton Brown living, listen to that podcast. Number 2 is a tie between 2 podcasts put out by Tested.com. Now, Tested.com is a website. They have their own YouTube channel. They are associated with Adam Savage and Janie Heineman, the Mythbusters. And so they've got these 2 different podcasts. One is called This Is Only a Test. It's the official podcast of Tested.com. And the other is Still Untitled, the Adam Savage Project. Now, both of these podcasts, neither of them are really interview styles. This Is Only a Test is definitely not. It is Will Smith and Norm Chan, and generally always a third member, whether it's, they've got a general regular, but recently, in the past few months, he's not been a regular on it. So they'll have a third in there as well. And it's more of a news and opinion show about different pieces of technology, things they're testing, different things of technology that they're testing, whether it be 3D printing software, Oculus Rift, different video games maybe, even just some really far out software, stuff that they get to see at shows like CES or E3, things like that. Now, Still Untitled, the Adam Savage Project is a long name for a podcast, and it's kind of tongue-in-cheek because they were originally looking for a title for it, and they just decided to call it Still Untitled. This is a combination of them sitting around and talking about different pieces of tech that they're testing and that they're getting into, but it's also kind of a sit-down conversation show. They get to talk to Adam and find out, what he's doing, things that he's worked on, things in his past. So you get this really cool insight into one of the Mythbusters. And if you are a Mythbusters fan, this is a really cool thing. And I've been a Mythbusters fan since Mythbusters started. They are 2 of the only, I guess you could call them celebrities, that I really, really look up to that I have not gotten to meet. And actually, that takes us into our number 1. Now, my number 1 podcast is, and probably always will be, The Nerdist. The Nerdist is Chris Hardwick's baby. Chris Hardwick is a stand-up comedian. He is a television host. He hosts The Talking Dead, which is the after show to The Walking Dead. He hosts the Comedy Central game show, for lack of a better word, called At Midnight. And he's got his hands all over in a lot of different pots. But The Nerdist is a sit-down interview style show for the most part, where they'll have a different celebrity, be it another comedian, an actor, a director, a writer, a band. It could be anything that someone they're interested in either meeting or are friends with. They have them come on. There's usually not a set list of questions. And so it's really a conversation. It's a getting to know you period. And it's very informal, which makes it very easy to come into. Now, one of the best parts of this is when they don't have a guest, and it's just the 3 hosts, Chris Hardwick, Matt Myra, and Jonah Ray. And they just get around, they talk, and they catch up. Sometimes they have very, very serious conversations. The last few hostables have been super serious. And they still try to throw their comedy things in there, trying to lighten the mood so it's not, dark and dreary and whatnot. But, some of these podcasts, especially things like The Nerdist, is where you feel like these guys. You feel like, hey, I could hang out with these guys. They're cool. They're they're a little bit nerdy. They don't take themselves too seriously. They seem like normal people. Now for me, just about all the podcasts I listen to have come about because of the Nerdist. I first learned about the Dork Forest on the Nerdist. Jackie Cation was a guest around Christmas time of 2013, actually. And I listened to that, and then I checked out the Dork Forest. And the Dork Forest led me to the Tolkien Professor. Earlier in 2013, Alton Brown was a guest, and he'd been talking about starting a podcast. And then shortly after that, started the Alton Brown Cast. And he's doing that with the Nerdist Industries. Comedian and actress Mary Lynn Rajskub from 24, she was a guest on it and was kind of joking around talking about starting a podcast, and they suggested it, hey, call it Kicking It Mary Lynn Style, and it was part of this deep joke that kind of went on and on and on, and lo and behold, she starts a podcast called Kicking It Mary Lynn Style. They've had guests like Pete Holmes, who's got his own podcast on the Nerdist Industries, and he's also now got his own talk show on TBS after Conan. The people that have been on that show and then have done something new and exciting, it's almost countless. They're up to, oh gosh, let me just check, because I'm currently listening to not even the latest episode. I still got one left to go. Oh, let's see. Number 475. They've done 475 podcasts. And that's a lot. They do them 3 times a week. It used to be 2 times a week. So they've been going for 4 years now. So yeah, I love podcasts. I geek out about podcasts, obviously. This is a much longer video than I expected it to be. So I'm going to shut up now. I'm going to put links down below that are as relevant as possible to these different podcasts. Check them out. Check out their websites. I hope you guys enjoy them. And I'll see you guys next week. Bye.